Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? Among retro computing enthusiasts, Windows XP machines are steadily gaining in popularity. But since not everyone has the space for a desktop PC from that time period, let's take a look at a solid laptop straight out of the post-Y2K era. I picked up an IBM Thinkpad T30. It was launched in May of 2002, and like other models from the T-series of laptops, it was aimed primarily at business customers. The T30 has the classic understated ThinkPad design, but with a few interesting twists to keep things fresh. Its shiny steel display hinges are exposed to break up the matte black finish a bit, and the back left corner is angled, again just to keep the machine from looking too plain. The back features an interesting selection of ports. They're serial, parallel, and VGA, but also S-Video out, 2 USB 1.1 ports, 10100 Ethernet, and a 56K modem. On the left is a pair of PCMCIA slots and color-coded audio in and out jacks. The right side held a modular optical drive in what IBM called the Ultra Bay. Flip a lever and it could be pulled out and swapped. IBM offered the T30 with the option of CDRW, DVD-ROM, and combo drives that did both, though mine has the plain DVD reader. And hidden just behind the Ultra Bay is an infrared window for exchanging information with something like a PDA. A quirk of this machine's design is hidden on the bottom. There's an air-filled bumper towards the front with the purpose of helping reduce shock to the hard drive if the computer was set down abruptly. It likely didn't prove very effective, as it's a feature that quickly disappeared from future models. The T30 sported a keyboard both familiar and different from ThinkPads that came prior. It had the same trackpoint nub in the center and an expansive row of function keys, but added a bit of color by turning those keys gray and introducing the soon-to-be iconic blue Enter key. Otherwise, it carried forward the solid feel that ThinkPads had become famous for. This laptop is very satisfying to type on. One other change to the input arrangement had a much bigger impact. The T30 was the first IBM laptop to include a touchpad, which the company called the UltraNav. It was optional on the T30. Some of them shipped with only the trackpoint, but it proved to be a very popular choice. Not everyone liked or could get used to the trackpoint, so the UltraNav opened up the T30 to a whole new range of potential buyers. This machine overall is in excellent shape. Aside from some shiny keycaps due to wear, whoever owned this one previously took good care of it. There's just a few small scratches here and there. When I powered the machine on, I got an error message that didn't exactly surprise me. A warning about the date and time. Given the machine's age, the clock battery was likely dead, so I set out to replace it. Something well appreciated about ThinkPads is their serviceability, and the T30 is no exception. The clock battery hides underneath the main lithium-ion pack and is held in with just a single screw. Then the plastic carrier it sits in can be lifted up and disconnected. This battery was used in a number of other models, and new ones are still readily available today for just a few dollars. All I had to do was swap the batteries in the carrier, making sure that the connector was oriented the correct way. Then it just took a moment to reinstall it in the laptop and fasten it back down. Checking out the BIOS settings, it looked like this machine still had its stock configuration of 256 megabytes of RAM. While Windows XP generally ran okay on that amount, I wanted to do better. Officially, the T30 only supports up to a gigabyte of PC 2100 memory. But that spec was written when the largest laptop RAM modules available were only 512 megs. As it turns out, the chipset can handle the 1 gig modules that came later for a maximum of 2 gigs of RAM. So that's what I bought for a reasonable $20 US. I got the original RAM module taken out, then snapped the new ones in. But when I powered the machine on, I saw something strange. It was only reporting 1 gig of RAM instead of 2. I thought that maybe one of the new modules was bad, so I took the top one out to troubleshoot. But powering the machine on only led to a series of beeps, which corresponded to a RAM fault. I switched the modules, but the problem persisted. And after some research, I learned about an unfortunate design flaw in the T30. IBM had placed both RAM slots on the bottom of the machine to make them easy to access. However, it used surface mount connectors, and between the stress of being carried around and even just the force of gravity, they had a tendency to crack their solder joints and lose connection. The lower of the two slots tended to see this happen first, but both were vulnerable. As a test, I tried powering the laptop on while applying pressure to the lower RAM slot, but that made no difference. The solder legs on these are tiny, and even just one with a bad joint could be enough to keep it from working. They visually all looked okay to me, but cracks in the solder can be tiny and hard to find, so it was clear that reflowing the bottom slot was the best option. I used some Kapton tape to protect the slots from the heat, then applied a generous amount of flux to prevent solder bridges. I carefully ran the iron along the row of pins, making sure to not short them together. Then I did the same on the other side of the RAM connector, which was a little bit trickier because of the tight space. If I accidentally bridged pins here, it would be very difficult to fix. I reinstalled a RAM module just in the slot that I fixed and powered on the machine.
No way!
Yep, reflowing was all it took to get it working again. What a relief. To help prevent the problem from recurring, I cut a piece of thermal pad down to size and laid it on the RAM sticks. It was just the right thickness to act as a shim, so the metal cover could apply pressure and take some of the stress off the RAM slots. And with the computer showing the full 2 GB of memory, I decided to do another upgrade while I was at it. Laptops from this era were starting to come with built-in Wi-Fi, and my T30 was no exception. The problem is that the cards supported 802.11b only and didn't offer compatibility with modern encryption methods like WPA2. I'm not willing to turn off security on my own Wi-Fi network, so instead, I replaced the card. I picked up a used Intel Mini PCI card for all of $6, and it supports 802.11a and G along with WPA2. It snapped right into place, and I got the antenna leads connected without much difficulty. When I booted the laptop, though, it presented a new error message. I still had to fix the date and time, but now it was also saying that my wireless card was unauthorized. Looks like this machine has parts whitelisting in the BIOS. Basically, it would lock out any cards not sold by IBM. It's an unfortunate practice that continues in ThinkPads to this day, and some believe it started when Lenovo bought IBM's consumer hardware division. But that acquisition didn't happen until late 2004, so its presence in the T30 can only be blamed on IBM. Thankfully, there is a workaround. Some crafty ThinkPad owners discovered a way to change data in the machine's CMOS to disable the whitelist. I connected a USB floppy drive to the laptop, then started it up off of a boot disk I made. It contains a program that makes the necessary system changes, and overall was a very easy and quick solution to an otherwise annoying artificial limitation. Since this ThinkPad was almost 20 years old, I figured one last bit of maintenance worth doing was to check and clean the CPU heatsink and fan. 2 screws secure the keyboard, then it could be lifted up and disconnected. The fan assembly was easily accessible, and this one looked reasonably clean. I wasn't sure if the thermal paste was in such good shape though, so I got the heatsink unscrewed, then disconnected the fan cable. But this stuff looks to be good. In fact, it's possible it was repasted recently. It did appear to be fairly run-of-the-mill paste, which I wanted to replace with something better. And that's because this machine came with a Pentium 4 processor. Through the 90s, Intel had made steady and solid improvements to its Pentium processor series, but when the P4 was launched in November 2000, it took a different direction. The company decided that the marketing advantage of being able to advertise blindingly fast clock speeds was more valuable than improvements to efficiency or actual performance. Its so-called Netburst architecture then gained a reputation for consuming a lot of power, running hot, and in some cases, actually offering less performance than older processors at lower frequencies. Intel figured that it could pull ahead by dramatically ramping up the P4's clock speed, claiming that in time, it could reach a ridiculous 10 GHz. But Netburst ended up running out of steam in late 2004 at only 3.8 GHz. Intel eventually realized its mistake and released new CPUs in 2006 based on its Core architecture, which, interestingly enough, was derived from the same design that chips prior to the Pentium 4 had used. Turns out the Pentium 3 still had plenty of gas left in the tank after all. My ThinkPad T30 came with a 1.8 GHz Pentium 4M, but IBM offered several other options from 1.6 to 2.4 GHz. Since it shipped with Windows XP, that's what seemed most fitting to reinstall. Only a few drivers needed to be loaded manually, such as those for the Wi-Fi card I swapped in. It's generally not a good idea to access the internet with unsupported operating systems like XP, but being able to connect to a Wi-Fi network can make transferring files from another PC much more convenient, which is why I did the upgrade. Another driver I needed to install was for the video card, and the graphics in the T30 were actually rather impressive for a business class laptop. It shipped with an ATI Radeon 7500 with 16 megabytes of video RAM connected through an AGP bus. Can it play Crysis? Nope, no chance. But it is still plenty for games like Quake 3 Arena, where it posts very respectable numbers even at native resolution and maximum quality settings. There were two display panel options for the T30. Both were 14.1 inches in diagonal and differed only in their resolutions. My machine has the standard 1024 by 768 screen, but one that could do 1400 by 1050 was also available. A few hard drive options could be had too, ranging from 20 to 60 gigabytes. But they're all mechanical IDE drives, and as such, disk performance is a big bottleneck in this machine. Sequential numbers are okay, but as expected, random I/O is dismal. And that led me to the last upgrade I'd make to this laptop, swapping its drive for something solid state. I've previously used an IDE to compact flash adapter to replace a mechanical drive, but that was on a machine running Windows 95. I find that NT-based versions of Windows, like 2000 and XP, tend to leverage the memory page file much more aggressively, so I'd worry about wearing out a CF card in this T30. So instead, I bought a dedicated IDE SSD. It's a 32 gig model from KingSpec and set me back about $40. Of course, I was a bit curious as to what was inside it, so I took out the 6 screws holding the PCB to the plastic casing to find it's really just a bridge board for an mSATA drive. It looks like a standard part, so if you wanted, you could probably replace it later on. How meta. Upgrading the upgrade. A single screw holds the drive in the ThinkPad, but when I tried to drop in the SSD, it didn't want to seat properly. I found that the IDE connector pins poking through the bottom of the PCB were enough to throw it out of alignment. So I used a pair of flush cutters to trim them flat. And that did it. The machine detected the drive, and I got Windows reinstalled. Performance-wise, the results were mixed. Sequential reads and writes weren't much faster than the mechanical drive because both can max out the Ultra ATA interface in the machine. But random I/O saw a huge jump, and it's these kinds of operations that can determine how snappy a computer feels. Needless to say, this ThinkPad operates very smoothly now. Even without the benefit of flash media, though, I can understand why this machine had such a solid reputation during its time. Despite having a less than ideal processor, its good build quality, interesting design, ease of disassembly, and overall great feature set were far beyond what a lot of other laptop makers offered at the time. And today, I'm still quite impressed with this machine and consider it one of the best retro computers in my collection. It wasn't very expensive. I picked mine up from Free Geek Twin Cities for $65 US, and the upgrades I installed were pretty cheap too. I'd recommend it to anyone looking for a Windows XP laptop, except for that design flaw with the RAM slots. But if you have the skills and patience to deal with that, the ThinkPad T30 is a compelling option for those with no room or desire for a desktop. It may not be the best choice if your focus is the cutting-edge games from that time, but otherwise, it's easy to see why it was so well regarded when it was new. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. You can follow me on social media at thisdoesnotcomp, and as always, thanks for watching.